This podcast is brought to you by WRFL, Radio Free Lexington. Find us online at wrfl.fm. Catch us on your FM radio while you're in Central Kentucky at 88.1 FM all the way to the left. Thank you for listening, and please be sure to subscribe.
Welcome to From the Woods, Kentucky. I'm Lhotka, and I'm here with my co-host, Renee Williams. Today in studio, we have Dr. Mary Arthur and Nic Williamson. Dr. Arthur is a professor of forest ecology in the Department of Forestry and Natural Resources at the University of Kentucky. She is also chair of the steering committee of the Natural Resources and Environmental Science undergraduate program, and she's one of the co-leads of the Urban Forest Initiative. We also have in studio Nic Williamson, who works at the University of Kentucky as the Urban Forest Initiative Coordinator. It's a pleasure to have both of you in studio today to talk about the Urban Forest Initiative. So before we get started talking about the Urban Forest Initiative, tell us a little bit about your background and what you do here at UK.
As Laura just said, I'm a professor of forest ecology, and my job in that role is to be the one person in the department whose expertise is primarily in forest ecology. A lot of my job focuses on doing research on forest ecosystems, and so I think of myself as an ecosystem and community ecologist. I do a lot of work on fire and the role of fire in eastern Kentucky ecosystems. In addition, of course, I teach, and so I teach a couple of different classes at UK, forest ecology being what I consider my kind of teaching bread and butter. And then I also supervise graduate students, and so I've had a number of PhD and MS or master students over the years who have worked on various different kinds of research questions that I'm interested in pursuing.
Thanks. How about you, Nic?
So as a coordinator for the Urban Forest Initiative, I'm involved with day-to-day activities involving outreach and education on urban and community forestry. So that takes the form of direct outreach, classroom visits. We have a lot of interns, so I get to interface with them and mentor them on their daily activities as well.
So why don't you tell us what first got you both involved in forestry and natural resources? What made you interested in it?
Yeah, so for me, I think I really just loved being outdoors. I spent a lot of time, especially in my teenage years, outdoors. I grew up in Denver, Colorado, and in my late teens, I started working for an organization called the National Outdoor Leadership School, leading students through the mountains for a month at a time. And so from there, I kind of started thinking, gee, I wonder how I could parlay this into a little bit more of a career where I could wed that part of the stuff that turns me on and makes me happy with some of the more intellectual pursuits that I was also interested in.
What about you, Nic?
I guess I caught the bug early too, just the outdoor, the being outside and climbing trees and all that sort of thing. And then I realized somewhere along the way, it's probably during college, that I lived in an urban forest, and I never thought of myself as living in an urban forest. So that sort of sparked my interest in this urban and community forestry.
Okay. Thank you for telling us a little bit about your background and what got you started on this. So now the main reason we're here today is to talk about the Urban Forest Initiative. And can you tell us what that is and how it got started?
Yeah, so I guess there's sort of a couple of different threads here. As the professor for the forest ecology course, I had started infusing my class in my lab with a little bit of urban forestry stuff. And in fact, I think Nic was one of the first students who benefited from that urban forestry element of forest ecology, and then also the natural resources capstone course that I taught. And at the same time, Lynn Risky-Kinney, who's my co-lead on UFI, had also been thinking a lot about a lot of the forest pests that are really prevalent in urban systems, and had been incorporating a lot of that into her thinking and teaching about urban forestry. And so a few years ago, in 2014, I guess, I had hired Nic to work with me on another project, and along the way, we just started revisiting some of the work that he had done that was really kind of really insightful work looking at the urban tree canopy in Lexington. And so we just started talking about what a shame it was that we had let that go, and let's pick that up again and start thinking and talking more about urban forestry and trying to fill in the gap for urban forestry that existed in the Department of Forestry and Natural Resources. And so we just started thinking we need to stand in the gap of this knowledge base, but also this education base for urban forestry here on campus and in Lexington. And so that was really, I think, kind of the beginning of the Urban Forest Initiative. And Lynn was very excited about that too. And so together, the three of us created this UFI. Mm-hmm. We refer to it as UFI. It's kind of a funny name, but that's what we call it, UFI.
So you have some excellent programs that you've started within UFI. Can you tell us a little bit about those?
You want to start?
Sure. So one of the sort of tip of the iceberg activities is our Adopt a Tree program, mm-hmm. and that involves, there's two main components to that, and one of them is actually measuring the diameter of a tree, and then identifying the species of that tree, and then plugging those two things into this National Tree Benefits Calculator, which then will estimate the ecosystem benefits that tree is providing. So that's sort of the science-y aspect of Adopt a Tree. And then the other part is just sort of this open-ended response, which is asking, why is this your favorite tree? Or why do you like this tree? And I think those two aspects together create sort of an interesting responses as to when you ask people to recognize a tree and look at a tree, why that tree stands out to them and why they like that tree. And then they also get this sciencey aspect of how many gallons of stormwater does that tree intercept? What are its energy benefits to the city? So
are all these trees on campus here?
They're
or are they
all
throughout
around.
the city?
Yeah, there's most of them are in the city of Lexington, but there's a few satellite cities that have picked it up and started to do this too. So we're seeing adopted trees in Richmond and Berea and places like that. So
if someone's interested in that, how do they adopt a tree? What's the process for them if they have an interest?
So all the instructions can be found on our website,
okay.
And a lot of other things can be found on our website too, which is
we'll give you that website in a little bit, but here we'll look it up for you.
Yeah, it's ufi.ca.uky.edu. And there's a little tab that says Adopt a Tree, and if you click on that, you can get all the instructions on how to actually adopt a tree. And I should also add that we're really excited about the Adopt a Tree this year because we have what we're calling the Million Gallon Challenge. And so we want to get enough trees adopted this year to fill a tree stormwater gauge up to 1 million gallons as part of our work with the city of Lexington this year.
Yep, so that's a great segue to say, I actually kind of want to back up a little bit and say that a lot of the goal of the Urban Forest Initiative is to link up with people who might not be fully aware of how important forests are or trees are or how important our urban forest is to our lives in cities. And so with most people in the United States living in cities, that's really the main nature that many of us interact with on a daily basis. And so really a lot of our goal is to kind of tap at that feeling that people have about nature that they've sometimes forgotten about, and then also after tapping into that sort of emotional connection to trees, then to use that emotional connection to trees to help people understand how incredibly important those trees are to things like mitigating the urban heat island, reducing air pollution. So in a lot of cities, and including here, especially in neighborhoods with fewer trees, a lot of people, and especially kids, have asthma. And so having more trees that can intercept some of that pollution can help to mitigate those asthma issues. I also want to back up and say that UFI's kind of two different things. So one of the things that UFI is that it's a working group. And so I just want to shout out to all the people in Lexington who've been doing urban forestry work for decades. And there are many of them. And what UFI added to the mix was an opportunity for all of those people working on urban forest from all sorts of different aspects to come together in a room together every other month and brainstorm ways that we can create a bigger buzz around urban forests and support each other in educating people about urban forests and developing new programs. And it's been this incredible, fun kind of creative engine that we've created together. And we'll talk in a few minutes about something that we're planning for this fall called Tree Week. And then the other thing that UFI is it's a core team of people made up of Lynn Risky-Kinney and me and Nick, and then all of the other people that work with our core team, the interns who we'll talk about momentarily, producing and delivering all sorts of different kinds of programming to help connect people to the value of their urban trees and the urban canopy in Lexington, but also in the region and beyond.
So you also have tree walks around. Are those on campus as well, the tree walks, or are they everywhere, like you had mentioned before?
Yeah, okay, so the tree walks, we really have to shout out Brianna Dameron on this one. So she is an undergraduate nursing student who we first discovered when we were hiring a summer intern a couple of summers ago. And she just has this innate capacity to lead people through mindfulness experiences. And so what she's created are these audio mindfulness tree walks for campus, and you can access them from our website, and you can put them on your phone and listen to them, and it will guide you to just a couple of trees and give you a moment to be calm around those trees, maybe listening to the rustle of their leaves, maybe touching the bark, and maybe just opening up your senses to the urban nature that's right around you. We have one of these walks right near Young Library, so she did that very intentionally to say, students are pretty stressed. They're studying for exams, and maybe, if we could get them to come outside and spend a moment interacting with these trees and listening to this audio file, it will calm them down. And then she also has in-person walks that she does every Friday at 1 and 1:30 right over by the dental school, sort of between the dental school and the Markey Cancer Center. And there again, she leads groups of people just in a little mindfulness exercise that will leave you incredibly calmed and just feeling at peace with the world, at least for 10 minutes while she does this. And so she's just really, really, really gifted in doing that.
Yeah, that's great. So it sounds like there's some great things that students can do and people can do right here on campus. For those of you that might not be on campus, you also have some great resources on your website, kind of getting information out there to the public, the Tree Talk information that you have on your website. Can you tell us about some of those items that you have out there?
Yeah, sure. So the idea for the Tree Talk came out of the working group, so the larger Urban Forest Initiative group. And many of the authors of those articles are working group members. And so there's an array of different articles from, wildlife, urban birds, how to mulch a tree, invasive species. There's a whole host of articles to look at in Tree Talk. And so, yeah, again, they're on our website.
Okay. Great. You also have, you want to say something else about that?
Well, you might be about to ask me about the undergraduate certificate in urban and community forestry.
Sure.
So we recently worked with Dr. Ellen Crocker to write a proposal to the U.S. Department of Agriculture for a program called Higher Education Challenge Grants to create an undergraduate certificate for students here at UK who might be interested in urban and community and forestry. And so what's really exciting about this program, I think, is that we've designed it so that pretty much no matter what your major is, you might be interested in getting this certificate. And so the idea here is to engage people in thinking about trees and urban nature and the role that those trees play in the sort of the quality of life that we all experience. And it's got 4 different pathways that people could follow. So one is arboriculture, and that might just be what you think about when you think about urban forestry. It's the caring for, it's how we care for trees, keeping them healthy, trimming them, planting them correctly, mulching them correctly, all of that kind of thing. But another one of the pathways is looking at human health and wellness. And so that sort of dovetails with what we just told you about Brianna Dameron's mindfulness talks. And so it's really finding pathways for people to think about the connections between trees and urban nature and health, whether that's through physical attributes of health or mental and emotional. We have one that's about planning and design, so that's really about thinking about how we design cities so that they're greener and so that they are better designed for doing things like mitigating stormwater and reducing the urban heat island. And then the last pathway within this certificate is environmental education. And so that would be for people who are really excited about teaching about environmental science in various different pathways and want to do it as an environmental educator.
You've been listening to From the Woods, Kentucky with co-hosts Renee and Laura. We'll be right back after this short break.
Welcome back to From the Woods, Kentucky. Let's get back to our interview.
So it also looks like you're going to have a big tree week coming up in October. What kind of activities are you going to be doing during that week?
Well, first we should read you what our mission statement is for Tree Week. So, and I should also preface it by saying Tree Week is a huge collaboration of so many different partners. We had a meeting yesterday with probably 35 or 40 people around the table, and every one of those people is offering or helping to offer some activity. And so we can't really detail what all those activities are, but we'll give you a smattering of them. So the idea behind Tree Week is that it's a celebration of Lexington's trees and all the ways that trees impact our lives. And so the goal is that to make it so it would be really difficult to be somebody living anywhere in Lexington of pretty much any age who doesn't know that October 6th through 14th is Tree Week in Lexington. And so we're going to use this week to celebrate and synthesize the roles that trees play through creative, informative, and fun-filled activities. And those activities are going to include tree planting. There's 5 elementary schools and maybe a middle school that are going to be doing tree planting. So we're working with Fayette County Public Schools. We hope we're going to be having a part that looks at trees and art and culture. We'll have some mindfulness pieces. We're going to be doing some physical events like mulching trees. We're going to have a couple of seminars where people can learn more about how we implement trees and tree programming into cities. What else?
Let's see. I was thinking the last event. It ends with the Kentucky Tree Climbing Championship. So that's the last weekend of Tree Week.
So do people have to register to do this, or do they just show up?
So we're working actively to fill out the schedule, but the schedule is up on the website, and so you can go and see activities that are happening each day of Tree Week. At this point, and more are being added regularly.
Almost everything is free. There is one landscaping symposium that's going to be on October 6th. That's not free, but you'll be able to get information about it. And otherwise, everything else that's going on, I believe, is free. And a lot of the events that we're planning are going to be week-long events. So, for example, the public libraries are all going to be doing a tree-themed week so that kids can check out books about trees. We're working with bookstores so that they will have books that are about trees and trees in our environment for sale and highlighted. So, it's going to be open to everybody, and we're hoping that we're going to get a lot of teachers on board with it so that there'll be a lot of different ways that people will be bumping up against, or bumping up to, not against, with all the different ways we can celebrate trees for that week.
Sounds like it'll be a fun week.
I think it's going to be
loaded
a blast.
With activities,
and,
yes.
So if we could convey a visual to you listeners there on the radio, we have this marvelously warm and engaging poster that we've had created by Cricket Press. And so this is the artwork of Sarah Turner at Cricket Press, and I'll try to describe it a little bit so that when you see them around town, you'll go, oh, that's that Tree Week thing they were telling us about. And so what it is essentially a circle of trees, and inside that circle of trees are all these people, and they're doing various different things like playing in the leaves and picnicking and running around and reading. And so you can just imagine all the different ways that people could be in the city, but at the same time engaging with urban nature and with urban trees in the city. And so now that I've described that poster to you, you're going to start seeing it popping up everywhere, and you're going to realize, oh yeah, I have seen that poster. And when you see the poster, it'll make you go, oh, I've really got to do that because that looks like so much fun. So we're pretty sure there are going to be a bunch of events that really are going to be a whole lot of fun, and we encourage you to look it up and join us.
Great. Thank you for telling us about that. So, this is Tree Week is a great opportunity for students to get involved, and there's other ways for students to get involved too. You mentioned that you have some undergraduate students from different majors working as interns. Can you tell us a little bit about what some of them do for you?
Sure. So this summer, we've been flush with interns. We have 3 or 4 interns working with us this summer, and our main one of our main sort of pushes over the summer has been to actively inventory trees in the city of Lexington. And so these interns are going out with their smartphones and with diameter tapes, and they're literally walking streets and neighborhoods all around Lexington and identifying trees. And then to go along with that, they're also hosting neighborhood workshops where they actually bring the neighbors to a park or a public place in the neighborhood and give them sort of some instruction on how to do a street tree inventory, and then actually lead those neighbors to do inventory of their own neighborhood, their own trees. So that's been really fun, a fun activity for me to help lead, and I think fun for our interns too to actually get that engagement, sort of outside and work with community members and sort of be responsible on when they're going to be in a certain place and meet these people and coordinate this sort of inventory that we're doing of the city. So.
Okay, and so just to add on to what Nick just said, the people, most of the people that we hired this summer, we trained in a spring training that we called the Tree Cats, and so these interns this summer are called Tree Cats, and so they have this great name and kind of badge, and we're hoping that we'll be able to continue the Tree Cats going forward. And so for those of you who think, well, that sounds like fun and the kind of thing I might want to be involved in, please reach out to us, and hopefully we'll be able to do some additional trainings this spring. And then another way that students have been involved with us every year is through something called the Summer Sustainability Fellowships, research fellowships. They come by different names, but they're $2,500 of funding for the summer. And to win that $2,500, what you need to do is write a proposal to do some research. And so we've got 2 different students doing research with us this summer. One of them is, again, Brianna Dameron, and her research looks at mitigation of pain and the experience of pain for patients in the hospital when they view an audio visual of nature. So it's sort of a nature therapy idea that maybe if we can pull our mind away to this mindfulness, through mindfulness to nature, that the experience of pain will be lessened. And so that's what her research will look at. And then another student, Dominic Ty, is doing qualitative interviews in the northern end, the less treed end of town, to ask people who live there what their experience is of the amount of tree shade that they have there, and whether they feel like that's enough tree shade or whether they think the tree shade is important. So sort of cultivating a sense about the trees and the trees that are in your neighborhood, and whether that's how you want it to be, or whether you maybe want to have more trees, or whether trees are not something that's valuable to you in your neighborhood. And so learning more about people's perceptions about the trees where they live.
Could I just add one more thing? That for the past 3 years, we've had students through the Student Sustainability Internship. And those students have been funded by the Tracy Farmer Institute for Sustainability in the Environment. So it's been I've really enjoyed working with students, and we get students from different backgrounds who all sort of have a different angle that they think about urban trees. Brianna is sort of the classic example with nursing. So it's really fun to work with students from different backgrounds who all sort of are interested in trees in some way.
So for those students that might not have a forestry, natural resource, environmental background, can you just tell us a little bit about trees in urban areas, why they're so important? You've mentioned a few things that they do and the shade that's important, but just kind of, for those students that might be interested in what they're hearing but just aren't familiar with it, can you tell us about the importance of trees in the urban setting, what they do for us?
I guess I always try to think about, like, one interesting mind exercise is just when you're walking down the street, or when you're in a park, or when you're on your way from class to class, imagine that there are no trees around you. And how does that feel? I think a lot of times trees sort of just fade into the background, and they're there, we see them, but we don't think about them or focus on them. So, yeah, try to imagine a world or a city without trees.
It's hotter. It doesn't have as many birds. It's not as comforting in a way. One of the things we learned when we were working with first-year students and having them adopt trees is that we would ask them to talk about a tree on campus that was important to them. And they very often told us very kind of emotional things about the tree that they missed at home, how they missed the tree that they could climb, how there was a favorite tree on campus that they went to when they were lonely because it made them remember that it feels like home and that everything's going to be okay. Some of them talked about really liking some of the brand new spindly trees because they were just putting down roots, kind of like these students were putting down their roots and hoping that they would grow strong and resilient with time. So I think there's lots of different ways that when we ask people to think about trees, they discover this sort of visceral, inherent emotional connection to trees. And that's what we're trying to awaken in people, regardless of whether they know that they like trees.
That's great. Well, thank you both very much, Nick and Dr. Arthur, for joining us today. And if you'd like more information on the Urban Forest Initiative, you can visit ufi.ca.uky.edu. And then we'll also have more information on our website at www.fromthewoodsky.org. So you can find more information on any of the items that you heard about on those websites.
Well, thank you all for coming. We really appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Today on From the Woods, Kentucky, we're going to have another segment, which we're doing a little something different. It's on a student and his research. So let's get to that interview.
Hi, welcome to From the Woods, Kentucky. I'm Laura Lhotka, and I'm here with my co-host, Renee Williams. Today in studio, we have Jonathan Matthews, and Jonathan is a graduate student in the Department of Forestry and Natural Resources at the University of Kentucky. And today we're going to be talking with him about his graduate work on white-tailed deer in western Kentucky. So it's a pleasure to have you in studio today. And I know you received your bachelor's degree from the University of Kentucky in Natural Resources and Environmental Science in 2016. And now you are a graduate student in the Master of Science in Forest and Natural Resource Sciences. So before we get started talking about your graduate work on white-tailed deer, tell us a little bit about your background and what you do at UK as a graduate student.
Well, at UK, as a graduate student, I guess my first priority is to do research here, and then secondary, I take classes. And so your research is kind of just a big project that you're working on over the course of 2 years, or sometimes more, and then you kind of go to classes like an undergrad. It's just typically a lesser class load because you have this big project. And then in addition to that, I work with the UK Forestry Extension, and we write extension articles or do talks, educational outreach events, things like that with them. And then I guess in addition to that, I'm the president of the Forestry and Natural Resource Graduate Student Association. So we work with just social development, professional development, and academic development with the graduate students within the Forestry and Natural Resource Department.
Okay, that's great. So what first got you interested in natural resources?
Well, I grew up in Louisville in a very suburban area, and so I guess my first look into natural resources was we just watched birds, the bird feeder. I had a small wood lot next to my house that I'd play in with my brothers, and so just in that, it kind of developed this just, I guess, natural curiosity about the natural world. And so ultimately, as I went to high school and everything, I wanted to pick a career path that I wanted to do. Those influences kind of helped me choose this field to go into.
Okay, good. So tell us a little bit about what got you interested in your research on white-tailed deer. How did you get started with that?
So I've always liked white-tailed deer, and I've hunted them for my entire life. And so when I was given an opportunity to go to graduate school here at UK, I found out there's going to be a project on deer, and I kind of was interested in it. So I went and talked to my advisor now, Dr. Matthew Springer, and he kind of pitched the idea to me, and it sounded like something that I would be interested in because it did have that connection to an animal species that I was interested in for my entire life. And so I just chose it kind of out of that natural interest in it that I had just growing up and everything.
Okay, so tell us about the different aspects of your research. What exactly are you doing?
So our research is kind of broken up into two parts. And so we have, we studied white-tailed deer in agricultural systems, just influences that they have on crop yields, on crop quality, and we focus on corn and soybeans. And the other part of it is we're doing population analysis to try to see how many deer are on these individual farms and just this very localized landscape. And so I guess on the agricultural, the crop quality and yield side of things, we basically can exclude deer from different plots and then calculate the yield differences in there, and then whether or not the quality of grain that comes out of those are the same as plots that have not been browsed by deer. On the population side, we perform two kind of population techniques, and one is just with trail cameras. It's a pretty simple technique that anybody can do on their own farm. It just takes a little bit of time. And then we have a kind of a more robust scientific method with distance sampling, which is you kind of have transects and you count fecal or poop groups from the deer, and you can calculate their populations based on those as well. And so the hope is to be able to combine both of those at the end of the project to figure out how the population is impacting those different crops, yields, and things that we talked about.
Okay. And so what are you finding so far? Have you started summarizing your data yet?
Yeah, so last year we ran just a small preliminary data on 5 fields throughout the Western Kentucky area. And so we found that with corn, there's a lot of variation in yields over the spatial patterns. So you have you can have a plot of corn, and even though there might be a plot right next to it, just the difference in yields of those plots can vary a lot, even in a 10-foot space. And so it's really difficult to tease out any deer impacts to those statistically. From that, on soybeans, on the other hand, some of our preliminary results showed that deer may be impacting and decreasing crop yields and the yields that are browsed. So this year we expanded the soybean side of our project, and so we're going to hope that we can kind of tease out those different results and see if we can get something this year.
Okay, good.
Well, I noticed you said you use trail cameras.
Yes.
So what is they're showing you? They're pictures, obviously, but does it show you anything else besides what the size of the deer is?
Yeah, so we take the trail cameras and you can kind of grid out a farm in a very rough grid pattern of one camera per about 100 acres or so. And we just kind of bait the trail cameras like you would for hunting or anything else with corn. And we run a 2-week camera survey, which you just you take pictures about every minute of what deer are at the camera, and then you can use the antler characteristics of the bucks to determine a buck to doe ratio, and then that can ultimately give you a population depending on just number of occurrences and things like that. And we actually have a extension publication from the Forestry Department that we're working on getting that out to the public so they can work with that and use it on their own properties.
So what's the most interesting thing you've seen on a trail camera? I'm assuming besides deer, there's other animals that pop up.
I've seen a lot of deer, and so just some of the cool things you see is we've got just crows and turkeys coming down to eat the corn as well, and so you can capture them in flight motions too. And I've got one of a turkey flapping his wings, and his wings are all the way spread out.
Neat.
And just cool things like that just when you see them in still picture form, they're just cool because you can see details on some of these animals that you may miss just in the speeding of them by, and then if you watch them in person. So that's kind of cool stuff with that.
And you mentioned you were doing an extension publication. Are you working on other ways to get your final results out to the farmers or other people in the area?
So with the farmers we work with, we kind of explain the process with them, but I don't know that it would necessarily be I don't know if they can necessarily follow it like you could like a cookbook manual to implement it. So I guess right now that extension articles, the main way we do it, other than we will publish scientific papers, but as far as the public accessibility, that extension article would probably be the best way for them to
that's great.
look into it.
Okay. All right, so tell us the reasoning behind your research.
So the reason why we were to study these crops is that first off, corn really has not been studied in the past decade or so, maybe 10 or 15 years. And so we really wanted to look in to see if we could validate some of those old research claims that have been said. There's been no research on these crops here in Kentucky, and so that's kind of a big thing. We've had research in the southeast, in Mississippi and Alabama. We've had research, kind of in the Midwest area, but Kentucky's kind of this confluence of both of those, and so we haven't had any research here. We really wanted to seek out and see if we could figure out what was going on within our state and not rely on these other states and universities for producing research that we used here. So that was kind of one of the things we wanted to do. So corn and soybeans there's been 90 million acres of corn and soybeans planted across the state of Kentucky, and so it's a big impact to our economy. And so with farmers in the past couple of years, they've had a really economic downturn, and so because of that, even a few bushels per acre lost by wildlife can actually cause a significant impact to their ability to operate their farm. And so with corn and soybean prices being incredibly low right now, we wanted to see if the economics behind deer damage were actually impacting these different farmers and things like that. So we focused a lot of our research out in western Kentucky, and the reason why we did that was because it's a very ag-heavy part of the state. There's farmers from Madisonville all the way to the river is where we have sites, and so those farmers out there can have large fields that are in size. They can farm 4,000 acres, things like that, and so it matters to them more out there. It can, because they farm such a large impact or large landscape level.
So in western Kentucky, you're saying that the farms are bigger,
yes,
basically, than in eastern Kentucky or
and
central.
Yes, and that doesn't always hold true.
Right,
but in general, you've got very fertile floodplain soils, especially in that Jackson Purchase area, which is like land between the lakes over the rivers area.
Okay.
And so a lot of that area is just designated to farming out there, whereas in the bluegrass, we have horses and cows, things like that, some crops. In the east, we have timbers and things like that. But out there, just agriculture is a major component to the rural landscape.
Well, you've presented us with a lot of great information, and so I was wondering if you had like one or two takeaway items that you'd want our listeners to leave with.
I guess the biggest thing is whenever we talk about wildlife and our agricultural systems or just human-wildlife interactions, often we think of wildlife as something that's hurting what we would like. So whether it be deer eating our crops or ornamental things, we have chipmunks digging in our garden and things like that. But I think that one thing that I'm finding is that these animals are just doing their thing. And so a lot of times we can talk about removal or how to get rid of them, but I think that learning to coexist with them can often be a better strategy for us. And so that's hopefully what we can maybe try to do with our research is find a way that, maybe deer are having an impact, but find a way for these farmers to coexist with the deer. So I guess that would be the main one. And then just the fact that to get people involved in what's actually going on, and obviously we work with like farmers on a large scale, but even in their own, backyards, things like that, with the wildlife that is there, just trying to learn what's going on, the dynamics that are at play is kind of what I find just most important about research in general into wildlife that anybody can really do.
Okay. Well, great. Well, thank you, Jonathan, for joining us today. And if you'd like more information on what you've heard on this segment of today's show, please visit our website, www.fromthewoodsky.org.
Hey there. If you're enjoying this podcast from WRFL Lexington, you may enjoy our live radio stream at WRFL.FM and, of course, via radio at 88.1 FM in the Central Kentucky area. We have a wide variety of programs you're sure to enjoy. Just go to WRFL.FM/schedule and see what programs appeal most to you. Thanks again for listening to this podcast from WRFL Lexington.